Excuse me.
Yeah, there you are again.
There I am. All right. Like I said, a warm welcome to all to our intimate group of listeners, and we hope that some more people will join us later on. A special welcome to Olja and Sanda, who are going to share their stories with us today. It was our board member, Femke Heitma, who joined a reading or a lecture by Sanda and was very intrigued by the story she shared. And she asked her to please share a story again for our ICOM the Netherlands members. And we decided it would be good if we would set her story next to another story that is more in the present. Sanda will tell about her museum in Croatia and about a homeland war that is in the past. And we have Olja. She is a curator for the Territory of Terror Memorial Museum in Ukraine, and they are facing, as we all know, a war at this very moment. The question today is, how do you as a museum document a war? And what is the importance of personal stories that are shared and documented within a museum? I will give the word to Andrea Kieskamp. She is Secretary of IC Ethics, and she organized a meeting with museum professionals from Ukraine, and she was the one who introduced us to Olja. And we are very happy that Andrea is here as well, and I hope that she will say a few words to introduce today's talk. Also, I want to ask you to, if you have questions, they are most welcome. We hope there will be a lively discussion at the end of this talk, but please share them in the chat box so I can moderate the questions in the end. Yeah, like I say, I hope that we come to a beautiful conversation about this very intriguing subject and very urgent subject as well. So Andrea, please fire away.
Thank you very much, Malou. Hello, everybody. Yes, it was, I met Olja indeed in Amsterdam last year in November, and it was with IC Ethics, the International Committee on Ethical Dilemmas, together with ICMemori, the International Committee for Memorial Museums. So I see Teresine from this committee who is also present. Yes, first of all, I would like to tell you something about IC Ethics, the International Committee on Ethical Dilemmas from ICOM, because this is a very young international committee. And it was founded in Kyoto in 2019 during the General Conference. And it's the first time that there is an international platform for members of ICOM to reflect, to share, to discuss ethical dilemmas. Sometimes people are a little bit confused because there are two committees who are working on ethics. So we are the International Committee, and our main goal is to offer a platform. So we think it's important for people to share their ethical dilemmas, and this can be about all kinds of issues. So we want people to have the possibility to do this also in a safe space. We also gather experiences to foster the dissemination of good practices. And we provide input on ethical debates. But what we don't do, we don't pass formal judgments about right or wrong. And sometimes it's very difficult to say what is right and what is wrong. So this is what IC Ethics does. And since 2019, we have grown quite fast. So I think we have about between 200 and 300 members at the moment. And then the difference with ETHCOM in ICOM, ETHCOM is a standing committee. It's a committee of experts, and they are appointed by the president of ICOM. And this is the official advisory body for the ICOM Secretariat and for the executive board of ICOM. And at the moment, as you know, they are working on a revision of the code. And there were several rounds where members of ICOM could give their input, and there will be a voting in the General Conference in Dubai next year, which is for a lot of people also an ethical dilemma. But that's another issue. So this is the difference between the two committees. And are there any questions about IC ethics or ETHCOM? If not, no? Okay. So if not, I'm very happy to introduce the two speakers. Our first speaker is Sanda Kocevar. I hope I pronounce your name well. Thanks. She is a historian, an author, and a museum advisor of the Karlovac City Museums in Croatia, with more than 25 years of practice. She has curated and been awarded nationally for numerous exhibitions dealing with local history of 19th and early 20th century in a broader context. From 2007 until 2019, Sanda Kocevar was a professor at the Karlovac University of Applied Sciences, where she taught tourist evaluation of cultural heritage and introduced and conducted the innovative approach of service learning through the EU projects. And since 2021, she has been appointed a member of the Committee for Tourism and Tourist Guides for ENWI Croatia, Northwest Croatia. She is a member of the Croatian Museums Association and the Croatian National Committee for Historical Sciences. And she has been an advocate for the people with intellectual disabilities for 20 years. The author of the first publication with the international label Easy to Read in the Karlovac County. And she has been volunteering in several NGOs and was proclaimed the Volunteer of the Year 2018. And her areas of expertise are photography, travelogues and diaries as historic sources, memory studies, cultural strategies, and DEIA practices. So Sanda, that's the whole story.
Hello, thank you. Thank you. It is an honor for me to be invited at this panel about such a difficult topic as documenting war. I hope that this conversation and discussion afterwards would be a fruitful one, and that we could deal with many things. I have myself some ethical dilemmas about documenting war, so it would be interesting. Yeah. I will now try to share my screen. Mm-hmm. Can you see it?
Yes.
Okay. Just to see. Okay. Okay. So I will briefly tell something about Karlovac. You probably are not aware or familiar with the city. So you can see here on the map, I wrote the distance between Lviv, between the Ukraine and the Amsterdam. And Karlovac is about 50 kilometers southern than the capital Zagreb, capital of Croatia, and it has about less than 50,000 inhabitants. It was the city which boasts of its known date of birth. It's July the 13th, 1579, and it was named after the Archduke Charles of Habsburg. And from its beginning until the dissolution of the Austro-Hungarian monarchy, it was under the Habsburgs. It was built as a six-pointed star, as you can see on the first plan, as a fortress against the Ottomans on the confluence of two rivers. Our museum is a local museum founded in the beginning of the 20th century, but actually it started with its actual work in after the Second World War in 1952. It's a history museum in a historic house. It is this white house, which is nowadays under construction. It's the oldest house in the historic center. At this moment, we have 4 venues. Karlovac City Museum, which is this white building, the gallery, this cubicle, Dubovac Castle, and the latest Museum of the Homeland War. At the moment, we have 30 employees, out of them 7 curators, and we cover all sorts of all aspects of history, from natural history, archaeology, cultural history, modern history since the establishment of the Republic of Croatia, painting, gallery, ethnology, and so on. And just to give you the idea how the city looks like, I would like to share a new video for you. Can you hear it?
Yes, but I cannot see it.
Sanda, we can't see it. Sorry.
You can't see it?
No, we can't see it.
Oh.
Maybe you click on the screen. On your slide, maybe.
Change your screens. That
Just to see, you should share screen. You should warn me before. What to do now?
Yeah.
Can you see it now?
Yes.
Now, back to presentation. Can you see the presentation?
Not yet. I think you have to start sharing again.
Can you see it now?
Yes.
Okay. So just I gave you just this brief film to see how idyllic is nowadays the city of Karlovac. But at the war period, it was something completely different, as you can imagine. In documenting war, past or present, from my point of view, there are many problems and dilemmas. And I would briefly pose some of them, and you would probably come up with many more. First of all, I had the question, when do we start documenting war? While it is still going on? Or do we need a time lapse or time distance? And if so, why? Then what do we document? Do we gather the evidence of destruction, death, suffering, acts of violence, heroic acts, as well as acts of desertion, humanism among opposing parties? Or are there any criteria? And how do we document wars, and what do we collect? Museums are, as we all know, all about objects or exhibits that have their context and at its best, a personal story connected with them. These personal stories could be recorded in many different ways, as diaries, letters, memoirs, as well as oral history. Whose personal stories do we collect? Whom do we interview? Are there any limitations? I do not have the answer to those questions. They are here just to give an incentive to a discussion afterwards, I hope so. And all I can do is to offer you my experience and my story. As a young historian, I got a job in the City Museum immediately after the Homeland War. From 1991 until 1995, Croatia was involved in the War of Independence, or the Homeland War, following the dissolution of Yugoslavia. It was an armed conflict between Croat forces loyal to the government of Croatia, which had declared its independence from Yugoslavia, and the Serb-controlled Yugoslav People's Army and paramilitary local Serb forces. So when I came to the museum in 1996, just a year after the ending of the war, I found the devastated collection of objects of different kind, mainly from the Second World War and the post-war communist period. And I was at that time the only historian among the curators, and whichever subject, team, or project dealing with the objects I had in the collection I proposed, I was rejected. Why? One has to take into account a wider perspective what was going on in Europe after the fall of communism in 1989. Democratization of public space gave an opportunity to previously silenced communities, and the interest turned to the history of political violence, and heroes gave aid to victims. Previously, in the period of the Cold War, on both sides of the Iron Curtain, the past had a fairly defined and almost agreed form based on the victory of anti-fascism. The main characters were the anti-fascist heroes of the resistance movement. After 1989, the display of triumph turned into a display of trauma, and victims had the possibility to speak publicly about their pain. At the same time, we witnessed, I think that the whole Europe witnessed that, the loss of agreement on anti-fascism as a common framework of memory. Instead, in its place, came the consensus of two completely equal totalitarianisms, where the similarity of their results in violating human rights overshadowed the difference in the ideas and goals that drove them. It became possible to expose the hidden pages of official anti-fascist history, for example, Cold War taboos like collaboration of national institutions with fascist regimes, the political inhomogeneity of the resistance movement itself, and partisan crimes, but at the same time to fundamentally rearrange the interpretive and value framework. Suddenly, public space was crowded with competing narratives, with rivalry, wars of memory, and promotion of anti-fascist discourse, and finally, historical revisionism. We in Croatia have been heavily struck with it and haven't been able to cope with it since. So back to my story. Anyway, in that framework and that situation, I tried to give a context to the objects I found in the collections and connect them with personal stories. In collecting testimonies of that period, I was, I must admit, quite unsuccessful. People were reluctant to speak, especially when they found out that their testimonies would be archived and possibly used in the exhibitions and publications. And at the moment when they had to mention in the story of their lives that someone from their family was in the partisan movement, I often felt their discomfort, almost the need to apologize, apparently caused by the pressure of the environment. Moreover, during the conversation with the survivors, in addition to the described fear from the past, I encountered more often the current fear that their memory did not correspond to the new social framework. I know that you probably at this moment have questions like why I hadn't dealt with the Homeland War, because I was employed a year later. So in a way, it was served on a plate to me. There were several reasons for that. People who were directly affected by this war, by losing their family members, homes, or were injured themselves, were deeply traumatized and reluctant to speak. I myself had some moral concerns, whether I had the right to pester them about their traumas and therefore slow down the process of their healing by scratching the crust from their wounds, so to say. And I myself was traumatized as well. And it was overwhelming for me to hear and relive their stories that were quite similar to mine once again. Then at that time, I also believed that the museums were neutral and all the stories had the right to be told evenly. However, it was impossible at that period to get the stories from the other side. A few years later, another historian was employed with the task to deal with the Homeland War. The colleague was a refugee herself from Bosnia and Herzegovina. And this is the venue of the Museum of the Homeland War, Karlovac City. And she is the author of a permanent exhibition, Karlovac 1991-1995, which is composed of the indoor and outdoor part. And the permanent exhibition presents contemporary Croatian history, featuring the intertwining topics of the defense of the city of Karlovac and of civilian life during the Homeland War. As you can see, and you will see in a minute in the film, the ground floor, which is this hosts the memorial room of the fallen Croatian defenders, and the first floor is the permanent exhibition. What is the main motto or value that it said that it promotes the fundamental values of the homeland war, the idea of patriotism and humanism. And I will try to share the video about, just to see. Can you see? Can you see the video?
Yes, you can see it.
The Museum of the Homeland War Karlovac City is a historical one. It is dedicated to the modern and sovereign Republic of Croatia and the Croatian Homeland War. The museum is located on the heritage site Križanić Turanj, on the remains of invaluable Austrian military architecture. A testament to the rich and fascinating military history of the city of Karlovac. The multifunctional role of the building through history and the damages it sustained in the Homeland War have given it an inviolable memorial need. Through the project of renovation, the remains of that fragile building have been carefully preserved and resurrected as an exceptional exhibition topic. The soul of history in the walls of that building turned into this museum, and the building lives now as an outstanding artifact itself. The Museum of the Homeland War is a contemporary home of permanent indoor and outdoor bilingual exhibition, Karlovac 1991 to 1995. A modern, ambient, interactive display with more than 390 original artifacts donated by the community, as well as more than 3.5 hours of multimedia content, have created a space offering a remarkable sensory experience.
Ja sam Sabina Protulipac, rođena sam ovdje. Sa 18 godina pristupila sam obrani Republike Hrvatske i mog grada Karlovca. Ranjena sam na prvoj crti bojišnice, zbrinjavajući ranjene gardiste. Aktivno sam sudjelovala u pripremi muzeja, donirala osobne predmete za zbirku. Dio je moje osobne povijesti i bitan je za kompletan hrvatski narod. Ovo je ruksak koji su mi poklonili moji suborci i u njemu je nošen materijal koji je zbrinuo 200-tinjak ranjenika na prvoj crti. Donirala sam ga muzeju da moja povijest postane dio kolektivnog sjećanja.
The museum promotes ideas of humanism, investing in the communication and education of marginalized groups and anti-war messages in a war-struck area. We are focused on enriching the cultural identity of this community by greater participation in cultural life and living the spirit of tolerance and peace.
Okay, now once again, share my representation. Okay, can you see it?
Yes, we can see it.
Okay, great. So the museum was opened in 2019, and it was nominated for the European Museum of the Year Award for 2021. As it was said in the film, there are about 400 objects exhibited, mainly weaponry, uniforms, photographs, and personal items, and around 3.5 hours of video materials, mainly TV news. The testimony of the lady you saw in the film has been the only recorded testimony so far, and there are no such testimonies at the permanent exhibition. Meanwhile, 2 historians have been dealing with the collections of the Homeland War. However, some of the objects at the exhibition, accompanied by personal story and the context, were focal points of the exhibition. The most important, I would say, is this T-shirt and these jeans. This is Igor Tonklis, that's a young guy who wore this at his prom. You can see the jeans in colors of Croatian national flag, Croatian coats of arms on the T-shirt and on the jeans, and the T-shirt with this saying, which expressed his opinion about the war. What is more important, Igor Tonkli came to his prom wearing not the tuxedo or a black tie, a suit, but this, and soon after the prom, he went as a soldier to war and got killed. So it's one of the most prominent exhibits at the exhibition, which raises lots of emotions among the visitors. The second one is this cable reel, wooden cable reel, which served as a table in the shelter. If you look carefully, you will see these dates written here and names of people written here who were sitting during the air raids and the attacks in this shelter. And the third is in this outdoor exhibition, these armored battle trucks, Sveti Juraj St. George, which is handmade by Croatian engineers. They armored a usual truck because Croatia at that time had not had weaponry and even had a ban on buying weaponry. What I would like to say about the Museum of the Homeland War, is that although the reactions of domestic visitors were mostly enthusiastic and praiseworthy, they differed in their approach to the topic. Many comments missed the values the museum promoted and were full of derogatory phrases about the Serbs and praises of Croatian soldiers, seen in this dichotomy between idealized we and completely negatively portrayed they. Because official conception of national rivalry emphasized a hard and unchanging conflict between 2 culturally different nations. Some domestic visitors, but more foreign ones, and we have really a lot of visitors, objected superficiality and impossibility of deeper understanding of the war, one-sided view, and demonization and dehumanization of the opponent, us, them, good, bad, even at the lexical level, written in at the exhibition. As we know that museums nowadays are paying a lot of attention to visitor experience as a multidimensional and happens, as you can see in the diagram, between audience and artifacts in compliance with museum mission and values museum has. Visitors, in my opinion, should be able to relate to the exhibits, to the objects, and the emotions they carry, because the written texts also, like diaries, memoirs, letters, newspapers, are not void of emotions. Audio and video testimonies can definitely help it. However, memories are multidirectional and heterogeneous. They lack verifiable accuracy, and they are subject to ideological influences, personal biases, and distortion over time. Personal stories definitely should be heard, but what kind of stories and whose stories? The responsibility of the museum community on documenting war is therefore enormous. Now I know what I didn't know 30 years ago, that museums are not neutral. Each selected or unselected story, accompanied by a museum object, reflects the standpoint of a selector. This is why, in my opinion, documenting war is a difficult task. At the same time, it's quite easy to slip into political propaganda, because memory is sought to be canonized in a way that is comprehensible and acceptable to the people. The goal of the state is to offer a form that will make it easier to find words for the suffering, but which will also keep that memory under political and ideological control. Nowadays, Croatian society has been permeated with a dominant paradigm: male, Croat, Roman Catholic, straight, non-communist war veteran. As you can see in the picture, proud to be Croat. It's a popular souvenir. And this guy in the black t-shirt, his t-shirt says, "Where were you in 1991? So the shared memory of humanity is a utopia. It's unattainable, inappropriate with an artificial goal. For me, it's more appropriate to strive for negotiations and interweaving of discourses and respect for other people's narratives. Even if it's not possible to move to the level of post-national memory making, because memories are currently largely sponsored by national states, the researchers and the curators' task is to remind of the complexity of history and the heterogeneity and individuality of each story. If we start from the thesis that the events of the past can be narrated in several ways, it follows that some of these ways can lead to aggravation of the conflict and others to reconciliation, and that we have a choice. I myself have the dilemmas. I don't have the recipe, or I don't have a prescription what to do and how to do it. I just wanted to share my points of view with you and my dilemmas about the approach and methodology of how to document wars. And therefore, I would conclude with the question: can and should a museum community reach a consensus and give some recommendations about the approach and methodology of how to document wars? So here are some for further reading if you want, and thank you. That's from me. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sanda. That was a very interesting story you shared with us. And it shows how difficult this topic is for museum workers and for all of us, more or less. I would like to give the word to Andrea again, so she can introduce Olya a bit better to us. And then after Olya will start her her talk. And I remind you that you are very welcome to post questions. Please write them in the chat box, and I will read them later on after Olya's contribution. There you go, Andrea.
Yeah, thank you very much, Sanda, for your interesting presentation with a lot of ethical dilemmas. Yes, and now I would like to introduce Olha Muhka. She is an author, philosopher, cultural analyst and manager, and an expert on international communications and human rights. Based between Lviv and London, she holds a PhD in philosophy from the Ivan Franko National University of Lviv. And since 2023, she is a senior strategist at In2, specializing in crisis communications. Olya has worked for the Central Office of PAN International in London as congresses, committees, and youth centers manager between 2018 and 2023, sharing her expertise in artistic, cultural, human rights, and academic fields in different range of projects in many countries worldwide. She is a member of PAN Ukraine. Olha Muhka is a curator and head of the Educational and International Department of the Territory of Terror Memorial Museum and program director and co-founder of the Ukrainian Association of Cultural Studies in Lviv. A member of the editorial board of the Religious Essays Journal and the former chairwoman of the Lviv City of Literature UNESCO office, representing Ukrainian literature abroad. She is an honorary ambassador of Lviv between 2020 and 2022 and has curated a lot of exhibitions. She consulted cultural institutions in rebranding and developing strategies, and she was head of the jury of Encounter, a Ukrainian Jewish Literature Award, and expert of Creative Europe. She was the host and moderator of the English language Dialogues on War, and author and host of the Ukrainian language podcast, Gentle Ukrainization. Olya was a professor at Lviv University and the National Pedagogical Drahomanov University in Kiev. I hope I pronounce it well.
Yeah. Gentle Ukrainization in action, right?
Yeah, exactly. There she taught cultural management and marketing, legal aspects of the culture market, and philosophical disciplines for over 15 years. And in 2007, she defended her thesis in philosophy on the topic category of human bodiness in philosophical and theological tradition in the early West European Middle Ages.
Intro.
Wow.
I don't know where you got that, but that's way too long. I think that let's probably jump to the sense of things, and thank you for such a
Yeah, you're welcome. You're welcome.
I think that what this, I feel embarrassed by this, by the way, but what it feels like, what I suppose probably Andrea was supposed to tell you about my background, that I'm a post-Soviet kid. I was born in the Soviet Union. My first language, despite that I was born in Western Ukraine, was Russian. Despite that, I have such a mixture of different. I was, and I still consider, and will always consider myself Ukrainian. But also, probably I was lucky to witness and to be conscious enough on those periods when Ukraine was gaining back her independence in 2021. And I was adult enough to join Maidans, students one, and then European Maidan. So I think that and I remember the moment when back in 80s, it's perestroika already started, of course, but Soviet school looked like a lot of propaganda, brainwashing, and I literally remember all those messages about the West and Americas hating all of us, want all the Soviet kids dead, and all those things. But then when I'm just growing a bit, I figure out that my parents have some books they hide in, that they are listening to some radio, which is not allowed to talk about in school. So I think that somehow for my generation, it built up the internal resilience to the propaganda things and messages and narratives, because even in university that was already 90s, it was very difficult times for Ukraine. But just to get anything from philosophy, you had to learn how to read between lines. You had to find a way how to leave aside all those quotes from Lenin mentioning the party, all those things. And the only way, for example, to read Freud or other 20th century philosophers were through the Soviet critique, right? There was always like the Soviet critique to the bourgeois philosophy we are not allowed to follow. And this is how, that was the only source of it, right? And we deliberately were taught in any foreign languages in a very bad way, not to be able to communicate, right? So we officially had English in our school, but there was English kind of, Marx and Lenin loved Russian praniks, something like that. Yeah. And that was it. I remember those times quite clearly, and this probably a part of my expertise, which allows me to come through some propaganda narratives in my professional life as an academic and later on as a specialist in comms. I also have a presentation. I will try to squeeze this because we are definitely a bit over coming our time. But still, there are some things I would love to show you and share with you, just to give you the general perspective of what the reality of documenting war in Ukraine right now, nowadays is. This is a little slideshow. Let me remember one more time, share sound. And here we are. So documenting war through human stories. Before the war, this is what you can see on the picture. This is our museum. This is how it looks. It's quite young. It's only opened in 2017, but the place is very old. This is a place which is a place of the transit prison which hosted two completely horrible places. The first, that this is a place from which most of Ukrainian and Lviv-based Jews came to just left for their last way. There was a place where they were deported for the concentration camp and they lost their lives. Obviously, in Soviet times, we were not allowed to preserve those. No. Secondly, there was a transit war, a transit prison after the Second World War. To understand deeper the reality of things in Ukraine, I only learned that my own grandmother was held there before being deported to German working camps, literally a few years ago, when I was already working in the museum. It happened quite accidentally, I should say. We were late in preparation of some videos for the World Day of Museums, and we decided that let's all of us discover our own family stories. And this is how it all started. I never ever knew about my family such a lot of totally dramatic stories. It just, about my grandma, I only realized for the very first time in my life why she was so angry all the time. Why she hated gods when any of us were speaking Russian, or why she hated my mom because my dad married my mom, who was a daughter of Soviet Army general. And the background is that back in 40s, one night changed their lives. She and her 3 siblings and their parents were sent in different destinations and were never allowed to see each other again. They met for the first time after 25 years illegally. Some of them had to literally just rent, not really officially, someone's documents to see their relatives. There was just the only meeting. They couldn't leave. Some couldn't not only leave, but just visit Lviv, for example. Some stayed to live by the end of their lives in Poland, in Elbląg. And when we started to dig deeper, it appeared that most of us, basically almost all of us, had the very same stories. So in a way, that was ironically that we were one of those museums which were kind of a bit prepared for the war, because that was our ongoing daily material we were working with. So when we were creating, and this is I'm really grateful to Sanda that she mentioned that, do we have this methodology to research and to create a safe space? And this is what we decided. We are going to create a safe space for people who never ever spoke about those memories. As you can see, we have plenty. We are collecting some Soviet monuments which are supposed to be ruined in a program of documentation, but our position is that we are collecting and preserving them as a way of rethinking the past, as a way of de-demonizing and de-heroization and understanding and building this internal resilience this way. Not through hiding, not through destroying and forgetting, because this is the easiest way for it to happen again. So this is exactly the place where those horrible things were happening. And as you understand the specific of our region, this is quite difficult to have any artifacts which would witness all those events. So we are chosen. It's not even deliberately, but based on the need, our main methodology is oral history. We would look for witnesses and we would record their testimonies. One of our biggest programs was called Unheard. So we were looking for elderly people who were able to share their memories and their testimonies. More than half, I believe that was rather about 70% of them, at the end of recording their biographical interviews, were crying and saying, "That's the very first time in my life I am telling my story." And 450 few individuals shared their stories with us. That's quite a collection. And you know that those biographical or narrative interviews, they're mostly around 2.5 and longer, hours. So no one is going, despite the research focused on that research topic, no one is going to listen to the whole thing, right? Maybe just their relatives or close people. So when we were collecting them, the next question was not only to collect and record properly, but also how we are going to tell those stories, how we want to switch the situation from them being unheard, being heard and recognized. Mostly those are very difficult and challenging stories we were rediscovering ourselves. And this is what I just wanted to showcase you one of the project, just for you to have an idea how we work. This is an international project, Lost Childhood. The media archive oral history interviews. They are also available on online platform on Postbellum. You're probably aware, everyone who worked with oral history know the platform, with Pamięć Narodu, based in Prague. And we gathered 30 interviews, 30 testimonies, which would tell the story of deportation of kids from Western Ukraine to Siberia and Kazakhstan. We were looking for the way how we can tell and share those stories. That was a very long way, even just for me as a curator, to find a way to make it sounds ridiculous, but you all work in museums, especially working with sensitive content, you know that we still looking for ways how to make it attractive for all visitors. Because when you are telling like, here you can learn something about deportation of children and Everyone like, yeah, thank you. We already have a lot of pressure. So how should we tell the story for people to listen? So we created this concept of a website about the lost childhood. And here we have stories. On the blue side, if you can recognize, that's a map of Ukraine, and those colorful dots, they're under there, the pinned stories of their background before everything happened. They have very, very diverse backgrounds. When the war started, someone was telling, I was playing hide and seek and I was sitting on the cherry tree. The story actually hit me a few years later, last year, when I was recording the story of a boy from her son and about his memory. That's already not oral history, but documenting, that's different methodology. But when he told me, when the war started, I was just hiding on a tree and I couldn't believe what I hear. That's almost 100 years after, and the narrative and the story repeats itself in detail. That was probably the only interview I had to take a pause and just leave the room for some time just to cope with my own emotions. And then when we hear the stories from the deportation, all their backgrounds, educational, social, whatever, they became not truly visible. They are telling the story with the very same words. This is all about the lack of food, about the death of their closest, about their fears, about the horrible hygiene situation, about this journey when they were treated as numbers, nothing more. And then we were trying first to draw Siberia or Kazakhstan, but then we found out that we don't want this to be associated by local people from Siberia or Kazakhstan as being an enemy destination. That was never their fault. This is here, our home, like Ukraine, Western Ukraine, and there. This is a home of others. And it was very important and interesting for me when we were reworking those testimonies that mostly they had no bitter memories about the local people. It was rather about challenges of them to find in their home, in the place they did not belong. Or obviously, if those were like working camps, that's talked to a different story, but it's also not about the local people. I want just to show you one little video from how we try to tell the whole narrative. So when you click on the first dots, you have a picture and a background. When you click on those little crosses on the cage, then you have the short videos when people are sharing their stories of their perception of this deprivation as children. And then on their side, that was the stories of how they lived and preserved their identity and their childhood here. Here, I just want, this is in Ukrainian, but it contains English subtitles, so you will absolutely.
Дорога була дуже далека, і дуже було тяжко, тому що жара, і літо, і віконечко одне, і ми діти практично всі, хто нас там був, всі в те віконечко висовувалися до Уралу. Після Уралу, зупинки були довгі, ми стояли, могли і добами, напевно, стояти, бо то ж графіку не було. І ще один такий момент, який мені добре запам'ятався, коли вже були за Уралом, коли ми в'їжджали до Уралу, під'їжджали в гори, там тунелі були, ми ж того не знали. І тут діти, ми почали бачити, що у нас перші ті вагони в'їжджають в П'єц. Наробили крику, нас палити везуть. Плач і молитва, більше нічого не було. То я пам'ятаю ті крики.
This is an outcome of our research that was a few years long project. You can see the screenshots from the website. You can see the Memory of Nation website, where most of the interviews, or at least some parts, are translated, so available in different languages. The biggest picture, it's the illustration of the exhibition, street exhibition. It traveled a bit around Ukraine and then was also in Prague. As a curator, there was a big challenge how to tell the story the way that people will still read it, and also to put it into some context. So as you can see, I picked one of the biggest triggers and put as a big quote. This is how the soldiers were talking to her. This is what Alexandra remembers. And then a few quotes which represent the whole story, her background, and then we still felt that it's lacking something. So we added that in bold, those facts, like historical facts, which creates that framework to understanding and thinking. This exhibition had quite a good, in terms of good, talk about those things in terms of good feedback, but a lot of thank yous, and then we get a lot of people coming and willing to leave their testimonies about their memories as well. So basically, we created some kind of safe platforms for those people who were not really ready to share their personal stories before. That was very important learning for us, and also we thought that we kind of prepared to document the war, that we know how to work with the personal stories. And then 24th of February happened. Our daily life and business as usual changed totally. It changed that way. We are prepared to nuclear war, by the way. I mean, as a museum workers, we had to buy ourselves all those costumes, and we have the security protocols, what if. But what we started with, there were evacuation of towns, because we had no idea. You could see our museum is sort of a wooden, yeah, so it's going to be burned within a few hours. So if something, it will leave nothing for us to preserve. Those are evacuation of our funds, but not only ours. We hosted some friends' museums as well. We hosted, and then we started to think, how can we preserve what we already have? We were very familiar with the lack of evidence and some artifacts preparing our previous exhibition. So we thought that probably digitalization and preservation, it's the only way. We need to scan to preserve everything, whatever happens. So very fast, we created something like our museum in smartphone, and you can walk through it around. We have the 3D scanning of most of the founds. We learned how to do most of things ourselves, because obviously we had no funds, we had no experts in it. So we were learning and then acting, doing whatever we can do. And we were trying to have the same way to our mates, the other museums, also, especially from the southern and eastern part of Ukraine. That was one of the first galleries, the Naked Room, which just evacuated all their exhibits to our place, and it's still there. And this is a very important story for us. This is the director of Starobilsk Museum. She was under occupation. She released to leave before the full-scale invasion and occupation of the region happened. She was hiding herself with her 10-year-old son a couple of weeks in different locations, and her kid was also shared among friends so often that no one could monitor whose kid is that. At the end of the day, they managed to leave the occupied territories. She only had literally the little tote bag with her passport, with some sandwiches by her friends, her son, and this parachute, as she considered it, that start of the new collection. Lisa calls it collection of the victory, we calling it collection of like proof of presence. It's open collection about what is happening. This is another thing which we decided to do straight away. Museum Crisis Center was set up as a grassroots initiative on the March 3rd, 2022. So a couple of weeks it took us, understanding that we need to help. We are based in Western region. So we found ourselves, let's say, probably the most safe place. There are no safe places. Lviv was aimed a couple of times, and now regularly Western Ukraine is already hit by missiles. But still, this is definitely different situation than being under occupation or living in Kharkiv or Kherson or other cities. So you can see this is that we created a network of museums. When museums are helping museums, 190 museums from all around Ukraine, and we found out that it's very difficult to find some money just to help on a very basic level, to buy some means to preserve your funds, to pay electricity bills, to help financially for, sometimes they had to bribe the occupiers, not to ruin, not to burn their museums, to bribe them to leave the occupied territories. A lot of museums worked on the basics that they just decided who is staying to preserve venue, the funds, whatever it is, and the others were about to leave or just not to show up on the museum, because as you're probably aware, that any places which would be the statement of Ukrainian identity, and museums are, as well as libraries are, they were deliberately targeted straight away. For example, we have pictures of Russian soldiers burning Ukrainian children books. That was the first thing they were doing in some occupied cities and towns. So we found out that this, just a very simple, very basic little grants to support their museums, as institutions. And the other thing is to help them, at least some of them, to stay in the profession. You won't believe, but one of the most difficult fights we lived out over that period is, as we are quite young and efficient museum, we have a great director, and she's very fast in taking decision, very brave. But then we were pushed very hard by city council to turn out to be a humanitarian hub, because we were prepared, and pushing back to stay a museum and keep people in their profession instead of switching to be, full-time volunteers. That was probably one of the most difficult and also ethically difficult somehow decisions we have taken. Those are open funds, proofs of presence. We decided not to call this, we're not talking about, we're not being judgmental here. We, on this stage, we're just gathering proofs of presence of each side and each action taken, especially in any occupied or war-affected territory. Those are different things. Videos, diaries. It's a letter to the soldier of the pupil of year 6 from one of the Russian school, sending some letters, just to keep their soldiers' morale. Some propaganda materials, which are also very interesting proofs of presence and disrupting and creating the alternative reality. But on this stage, we just gathering them, that we are creating our collection. We found out that we don't know how to do things properly. We are very experienced in terms of oral history, but oral history is not documenting. This is a very significant difference in terms of methodology. When you work in oral history, everyone knows that you need to have a historical distance, right? You have this overview. When you work with a fresh memory, and we are facing it on a daily basis, then those testimonies can change over days. Those are very different stories, not only emotional, but sometimes even factually, when you take in those testimonies in a day of the event, a couple of days later on, and then probably in a month or a few months distance. But if you can mute the iPhone because we can hear it. Yeah, thank you so much. So, and that was interesting situation when I had that testimony we recorded, that we wanted to record the longer video a couple of months later on. And then I tried to double check and fact check it through the interviews to the medias. And sometimes there was a big challenge to put together all the facts and find out the whole story narrative. So we organized an online program from different memorial practices for museum workers, artists, and culture managers, how we should remember, and sharing all our backgrounds and all our mistakes and all our positive practices and findings. This is a project we've probably given the most attention right now. This is a bonded culture. We are recording the testimonies, but also the damages which happen to some regions, which are obviously we can't go, even with a freshly deoccupied territories, we have a big problem to find tech teams which are willing to go there. Our museum workers are crazy people, they want to go anywhere, but if we're talking about video professionals, or especially we are professionals, that's a big challenge to find those which are ready to go, which prepared to understand how to mitigate risk and ready to take those. So what we're recording a series of things. First of all, it's just a general background context, how the city look, what people are doing, just their daily life. We're recording the museum as it is, any damages, if they open or not, how does it look. Mostly we're recording this museum part in a VR option, so later on people can just, have VR glasses and walk through those museums to have this effect of presence there. And we are recording the testimonies, but also not like a short testimony. We're recording a long 2.5, 3 hours interviews. It's narrative interviews this time, not biographical like with a lost childhood project. And then those are their testimonies. They just given us a different level of informed consent. They can, some just giving it to us only available for research work, only as archival thing. Some allowed us to use them to create some public facing product, something like we done with the lost childhood, but with this case. Some are willing also to, if we want to invite them to any public events to share their experience as a museum workers and everything like that. So as you understand, we are focused in our case, when I try to respond to these questions, Sanda put like when, as early as we can do, that's documenting, and not very short period, but we are prolonging it in time. It really helps to follow, to check in, but also it creates, and that was probably one of our biggest insights over the full-scale invasion, that the trust is the main currency of the wartime. When we work with them, as just jumping in for a few days, journalists taking their videos and leaving, we don't build this trust. Sometimes we re-record in videos when we already build the deeper relationship, when they recognize us as our people. They can trust and they can share the whole thing with their doubts, with their obviously a lot of ethical internal conflicts. There are no war where no ethical conflicts is. What we're recording as a museum workers, we decided that we want to record those which are usually not really on a main focus of the official news, right? Museum workers, or not only museum, cultural workers, sorry. So those are librarians, the directors of cultural centers, museum workers, and all the people around the cultural institutional management. And how I just shared with you that there's a different levels of, and how we are trying to tell those stories right now, because those things are going to change over time. And working in comms, I understand the importance of timely messaging. So this is why we decided to record longer stories. Then we can rework them and find the details we are interested when our research focus is changing. But for now, this is our first museum. We were recording this museum in Turkey. This is how it looked before. This is how it looked after the start of invasion. It just took 2 days showing. This is how our work looks. And the last video from this project I wanted to share with you, and then ready to talk.
Я не знаю, мене таке, мені хотілося впасти на коліна і кричати. Мені здавалося, що я цим випущу свою емоцію, свій трагізм. Поруч стояли працівники міськвиконкому, я кажу, що мені робити? Вони кажуть, а що робити? Прийміть, як є війна. Будемо музей оберігати? Чую чоловічі голос.
Будемо, звичайно.
На передовій дуже багато авторчан. І я знаю, що ми доклали частинку своїх вмінь, знань, тієї емоції, які викликали відвідувачів музею, для того, щоб ні в кого не було навіть інших відчуттів чи почуттів, що Україна понад усе. Мені здається, що музеї стануть тим осередком культури, куди прийдуть люди, аби відновити себе, свій емоційний стан, це все пережити і сказати кожен сам собі, що я серед того, що живить.
Я бачу розбитий музей, і я розумію, я не знаю, що казати, як кому дзвонити.
Це було що-то ще.
Понімаю, що потрібно було все це спасати. Ось це запам'яталося на все життя.
Мені здається, що з'явиться більше експозицій, виставок, які будуть стверджувати нашу українську ідентичність.
Here we go. Here are QR codes just in case that if you want to follow us in Facebook or Instagram or find our website. Also my contacts if you will ever have any questions or requests from the, some testimonies from the primary sources. I shared with the presentation with organizers as well. So if you will have any requests, please don't hesitate to contact. And I'll stop sharing. I think that I was thinking a lot when Sanda was giving her presentation, and I was thinking that how little do we learn from the past experience, and how little can we really learn from the different war experiences, because those are totally different situations. We are, in a way, we have an easier situation in terms that this is not homeland war. It's easier when you have an enemy. It's way more complicated. I have a bunch of friends in Balkans and living in Sarajevo, and when we were talking about how they were recording their war, this is totally different experience. And this is what is happening now, pushed by international organization as it's a frozen conflict. It's not a peace. But on the other hand, I think that how much it teaches me and us as a team, as a nation, from your experience, where not to go, what we should avoid, what we should try to maybe to do different. Maybe it's impossible. That's totally possible situation, but at least we are aiming there. So thank you for giving me that stage. That was very important for me to share. And let's probably start with the discussion.
Mm-hmm. Thank you very, very much, Olya. It was a very impressive story. Again, 2 impressive stories in the past, 2 hours? Not even, 1 hour and a half. Well, a few people who asked questions in the chat box have already left because they had other appointment, which is a shame. But Tatke is still here, so maybe we can go to her question, a brief question that says, why did I choose a young girl in the movie? And that refers to the movie you showed, Sanda. Maybe you can give me an answer.
I wasn't involved at the creation of the movie, so I really don't know. But for me, it's I would say a cheap trick on emotions. Children and war, and so not to happen all over again, to learn something that children are most affected by war or something like that. I would say that's the reason.
Yeah, I think it also applies for the question that Licia, who had already had to leave, posed, and she said, why did you choose to present children's personal stories in this way? And this was a reaction to your talk, Olya. In a somewhat similar project we had at the University of Breda, a project on survivors from World War II around Camp Vught, from where children were transported to extermination camps in Germany. We also told personal stories of children, but we decided to focus on the message of hope that we could distill from these stories, and not to make them less hard, but not to get visitors in despair, she said. I think what she means is we try to make it less cruel, but war is cruel. So that is a choice.
That's such a lot of mixed feelings and emotions which builds on this question. First of all, I remember, last years when Ukraine and any pictures of Ukraine became a sensitive content on social media and being blurred.
Yeah.
Right. And this is what the people from the peaceful countries trying to do sometimes, just to preserve their peace of mind. And you know what? I totally understand them, because sometimes when I'm getting, it's obviously due to the nature of my work, sometimes I have too much. Sometimes I'm not, like, I remember when I was working, I was completing a big preservation project in Myanmar. And after that experience, when I got back to London and there were news from Syria, I was like, I can't take anymore. I just can't. Mentally, it's gonna break me. Yes, so there are different levels of sensitivity, and but also different levels of responsibility. We were not trying to make it up. That's the first thing. We were trying to tell the real story. But on the other hand, you should also understand that the bit I showed you, that's just a glaze of the project, because I only showed you the hardest of the whole journey, right? The deportation. But then later on, all of them survived. All of them had their childhood. And this is amazing and very vivid and, like, let's say, just giving a hope story that we called our project, quoting one of them. They told, like, all those events which happened to us, they stole our childhood. We were, we had no parents, we had no, this joyful playing time. We were meant to survive. And then in the end of the day, they themselves started confronting the title. They were like, no, we still had our childhood. And this is the amazing thing, how they sharing, like, they've been sent, just for some really hard works in Siberia, -40 degrees. And what they're doing, they play, they being silly, they being kids. So at the end of the day, this is a very life-standing story, because all of them had that experience, and they are all now 80 plus. They're very strong people. Most of them are just talking very, clear way. They're very alpha of them. So it built them as personalities also. But I think that we can't deserve to make up things, because, and now I'll tell you something shocking for me. A couple of months ago, I was presenting on one of the conferences, also dedicated on creating participants' journey, sensitive content, and I'm preparing right now a big exhibition in Lviv on probably try to travel it a bit around Europe about the nonviolent resistance on occupied territories. And one Italian curator asked me a question. She asked, like, but what is your problem actually with the occupation? Like, just change the flags and pay taxes to different states. Oh. Yeah, I can see your face, and it just
sounds familiar.
It left me speechless, right? I was like, do you really imagine the reality of your occupation that way? And in my genuine opinion, I think that this is because of those makeups, because we are hiding ourselves, because we are rewriting children's fairy tale for them not to be violent. So when we are releasing the news and pictures from Bucha, Irpin, or other places, no one wants to believe that. It just never happens. It never happens in our history. It can't be real in 21st century, but it is. This is why we want to keep it to the real, first source testimonies and not make it up. Yeah.
Thank you, Olya. That was a very good answer to this question. I would like to ask people, how much time do you have to talk about some other questions that were in the chat box? Do we have some? Do you all have some time to stick around a bit? I guess so, as you're all still here. So then let's go to the next one. Arya asks, Olya, can you give an example of what you think you can avoid? You mentioned that there are things to avoid.
Mm-hmm. I think that I have one very clear answer for it, which is definitely like our internal decision. It's avoid any kind of heroization. Because in any side, it just brings you closer and closer to propaganda. Yeah. Because history without details tends to be propaganda. This is why we can't, avoid even a little, details, why we can't avoid naming things properly. We had this kind of big, heated conversation in Amsterdam about the statement in one of the museums in Amsterdam that, and then Auschwitz being released by Russian army. I was like, wow, wow, because there was everything but not Russian army. There was a Red Army, there was a Soviet army. To be correct, there was first Ukrainian front of the Soviet army, which was contained mostly from Ukrainians and Belarusians, fair to mention, because this nation being totally shadowed by all the others. But it's definitely not the Russian army. And when we spoke with the representative of the museum, she told us, but this is easier for our target audience to understand that they have no idea what is the Soviet army. Like, here you go, and they will never know. And this is your responsibility to share that genuine fact, not an easier way to understand the history by real history. So this is, so first we need to avoid heroization. Then second one, we have to avoid reduction in any kind of things. These are two methodological positions I'm standing very strong on, but there's still a lot of questionable methodologies. And like, for example, when we are choosing those little messages, right, to showcase, and this is always huge discussion. In our team, we have people with a different level of sensitivity, which helps a lot. We have quite cynic people, but we have overreacting sensitive people, and it helps for the final product. So we know if we made her cry and him angry that we did it that way, we are somewhere in a good place in our project. Yeah, probably this.
Okay, thank you. I think we're going to the final question. It was Justin who asked, thank you so much, Olya. That was the first. Your projects have kept me thinking since last meeting you a few months ago. It is wonderful that you document people's and Ukraine's identity by collecting human stories and oral history, but is there also a physical collection or wish to collect to go along with these voices?
Yeah, I showcased a bit, right? There's some things, but also what we're doing, like we trying things to belong to the location where they were found, right? So if it's in Sumy region, we prefer it to belong to Othurka or Trostianets Museum, but also that parachute, it's already in our museum. Some physical evidences, like people are bringing us some evidences, some soldiers, their families, like for this exhibition I mentioned for NVR history, I just received today in the morning the shield from Roma Ratushny. He was a hero of Maidan. That's a heartbreaking story. Just get this shield just made from, I don't know, there was probably something, I don't know, piece of the something totally, not military thing to protect himself. He was killed in action because then he was in the army, and his mother was doubting and kind of resisting to give it away for a very long time, right? It was one of those things which he was very young. He's only 20 here. But having these things, it's a big, I don't know, I can't even find a proper word for it. It made me happy somehow today morning that I got that shield and I can show to other people, because it's just such a huge story. But also it's heartbreaking, obviously, so it's very difficult to find the correct word. We're still looking for the proper words and proper language to talk about.
Yes. Yes. All right, I think that is a very beautiful way to close this off.
Yeah, yeah, of course.
That's sad, but wiser. And I think that is, well, a valuable thing to take home.
Yes. I just want to thank you because it's very important to have those conversations in a proper room with the people who have some experience alike but probably different, but also in a room with professionals who work in the same field, because it's always very different when you're speaking on very different stages. And thank you, Sanda, because it's very important learning for us also to hear all those stories.
Yes.
Thank you both. From my side, I'm very impressed by the stories, and there's so much to think about, and I feel that we didn't finish the conversation yet. But I think it's also good to end now because we all have to leave. But thank you so much, and to be continued.
Yeah, definitely.
Sadly enough. Thank you very much.
Yes.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Well, everyone have a good evening, and thank you for joining us. It was very valuable to be able
Thank
to.
you for inviting us.
Okay.
Bye-bye.
Very welcome.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.
Bye.